presentation that I have prepared, we'll be looking at a couple of different things and decisions and kind of, the national context of languages as well as kind of an individual institutional context. And I'll talk about some things that we've been doing at Georgia State, which is a large state school in Georgia. And within the university system of Georgia, it's the third largest. Well, it's the third largest in terms of budget allocated through the state. It's the largest in the state of Georgia now because we recently consolidated. It's not a merger. Very clear, it's not a merger. It's a consolidation. So a lot of these kind of euphemisms also are part of the neoliberal landscape, right? But now we've merged with this two-year college. It was a community college, and it's now a two-year college within Georgia State. And so we went from 30,000 students to 52,000 students. And so that presents a number of challenges, especially for the language department in terms of articulation. Students who are coming from the two-year college, it's a work in progress. I would love for those students to be able to just go from their 2,000 level courses directly into our 3,000 level courses. Doesn't always work out that way. So let me give you a quick synopsis of some of the things we'll be talking about. Introduction, you've heard a little bit about me, and kind of outlining and defining some key questions. I have notes. I haven't really prepared a paper to read. I want to make it more conversational, so I may periodically come back to my safe haven of notes to figure out what I was supposed to say next. We'll talk about the national context for language education, because a lot of what you're doing is fantastic, and I think it makes sense to me thinking about what's going on the national level. And it's important for us to be aware of, like, kind of in the national scene, what's going on, so it helps shape and mold and guide us with some of these individual initiatives that are going on at the campus level. And then I'll talk about some things to think about in the institutional context. And I really want to emphasize the context because and I'll talk about what we've done at Georgia State, that there's been some successes and some failures, but what works at GSU, may not necessarily work here, right? It's a different context, different city, different players, different stakeholders, and whatnot. But but the important thing that I want to stress at the end are strategies, and that we always need to be thinking strategically about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and who we're serving, right? Suggestions and a way forward, right? I specifically left it an indefinite article, not a definite article, because I don't believe that there's any one path forward for the success of language departments. I think we need to figure out contextually, institutionally, like what works for us, but always thinking how we can interface with the larger kind of national scene. So, who am I? Natalie gave you a brief synopsis, but I just wanted to repeat some of the things. So I'm chair of World Languages and Cultures. So this presents some opportunities and some challenges, right? It's a department that houses all of the languages on campus. And that is great because we have this kind of united front. However, the obstacle it presents is it's hard. What I've spent a lot of time thinking about is how do we forge a common goal, a common horizon, a common vision, and avoid falling into the trap of, German is dropping in enrollments because Chinese is stealing our students. And, when there's scarce resources, that's when territoriality emerges, right? So how do we keep our eyes on the larger kind of vision for the department? How do you forge a common vision with such a diverse department? And I often tell people that my department is kind of like a mini college because it's fairly large, but the diversity is such that when you talk about reallocation of resources, how do I say, well, German is shrinking, so we're going to move that to Korean because Korean has a potential for growth. I can't ask my German faculty to teach Korean. I mean, I could. I don't think it would go very well. So there's a lot of things that I've been thinking about and had to be very innovative about institutional initiatives. I'm also the director of the Center for Urban Language Teaching and Research at the Title VI Language Resource Center. I'll talk more about that later on. How many of you are familiar with Title VI? You may have noticed, if you, in your light reading time, if you've taken a look at Trump's proposed budget, Title VI is zeroed out. So but that's a proposed budget. The word in DC, and I'll talk about one of the key organizations I think everybody should be familiar with and on their mailing list, they have told me that there's wide bipartisan support for Title VI, and they don't believe that it will be hurt in any way. So we won't know that until October, November. But I'll talk more about culture and Title VI. I'm also on the ADFL Executive Committee and currently the ADFL President. So I believe Dennis Looney was here last year, so I work with Dennis quite a bit. And we organize, well, I'll talk about the ADFL a little bit, but I work extensively with Dennis on the ADFL consultancies. So more on that later on. And I'm also, in my spare time, I'm associate professor of Spanish, and my research focuses on peninsular Spain, and currently I'm working on a book that ties urban studies with tourism studies, and I look at the built environment along the coast in Spain, how that's represented in culture, film and literature, but also postcards, propaganda, films, marketing, things like that. So in the title, what I'd like to do is problematize a couple of concepts that you may have already keyed in on. One is this question of neoliberal, right? What is a neoliberal university, right? A university is an institution of learning. You know, we shouldn't be concerned with such things as neoliberalism, or it taints what we do as researchers, as teachers. And I think we've all heard, or you will hear, terms like ROI, incentivizing faculty, value-added, stakeholders, reallocation of resources. That's one I hear every March when we're doing budget. RCM, budget model, the focus on data and analytics, especially credit hour generation, especially to credit hour generation as it relates to budget. LOAs, DFWs, RPGs, not rocket-propelled grenades, although sometimes those can come in handy. There's clearly no shortage of acronyms in the neoliberal world. And so, but all of these kind of revolve around this market-driven focus on academia, institutions of higher learning that have kind of adopted this market-driven mentality, this market-driven model. And thinking of these terms, right, and how, especially those of us that work in languages, right, we're sensitive to language and the manipulation of languages and euphemisms and whatnot, and the fact that you may or may not know, if you Google, and I hope it's okay that I use a word of profanity here. The fact that you can find, if you Google academic bullshit generator, you'll find these kind of concoctions of phrases that are meaningless, but that you hear, like they're real, like, and I think there's also one for academic title generators, something like that, or academic bullshit title generators. So like the associate president of whatever, right? So, but the fact that you can find these kinds of generators suggests that the prevalence of these idiomatic expressions to the point of satire, right? That they're so prevalent and abundant that they become cliche. However, my position on this is, sure, we can make fun of these terms, and here you see Lawrence Bush's Knowledge for Sale, and I brought a copy if anybody wants to take a look at it later on. He kind of outlines the manifestation of these market-driven changes in higher education. And my point is, while we may find these terms ridiculous, and they do deserve ridicule, I would urge us to keep in mind the famous dictum of Hardinegri in Empire: there is no outside. This is our reality. We are inside this system. And so although we may find that the language of upper administration may seem foreign to us, the ideology behind that discourse frames our reality. And that's really the message of Bush's book. And my position is that it really behooves us to learn to speak that language in order to better communicate the value we know our programs offer. I mean, look at the things that you guys are doing this year. I mean, there is a lot of value added in those programs. And if we're able to speak the language of upper administration, we can better communicate that value to deans, provosts, presidents, etc. I would have told you some years ago, I would have been the last person to have really assimilated and incorporated these kinds of terms. And you'll hear throughout, I'll use them somewhat ironically. Please don't believe that I've been brainwashed. But I guess, what would a brainwashed person say? But I do see that understanding the point of view of upper administration has helped me really focus the vision for our department, and it's helped me become very highly strategic about where I place my efforts, because we're in a resource-diminished, a resource-scarce environment, so I don't have the luxury of time and energy to say, well, let's try that. No, let's try this, let's try that. We've had to really think in essentialist terms about what is the most bang for our buck. Like, if I'm going to ask my already overworked staff to put time in on this new initiative, I better be sure it's really worth our while. And I'll talk about a couple of failures on that note that we experienced a while back. But every failure helps us retweak and hone in on, okay, why did that not work? And what should we have done? And now we have some other things going on that have really been interesting. Now, the other term that I think we could think more about is language or language programs, because clearly what you all are doing is much more than language, right? Of course, the crossroads, the use of the word crossroads, I'll get to a little bit later on. Now, with language programs, I think we all know and we all felt the challenges that we face with dwindling resources, declining enrollments, the reduction of foreign language requirements. Does Vanderbilt have a language requirement, across the university? That's
not in engineering.
In the college of arts and sciences, even of arts and science, even BSs, like chemistry, biology. Okay, I envy you. At Georgia State, we have a college. I'm using a lot of air quotes today. I did not expect that. So, but we have a college requirement for BA degrees, but not every BA has the same requirement. So political science will have 1001, 1002. English will have had, past tense, 1000 to 2002. So 4 semesters. And they recently reduced that. They believe that they are losing majors because of their foreign language requirement. I told them I think they're losing majors because students really don't have any idea what they would do with your major after they graduate. But, they showed me the survey they did of their students, and there was many more comments about, don't know what I'm going to do with this after I graduate, than this foreign language requirement is killing me. There's 5 comments. But so they reduced their language requirement. So between them dropping majors and reducing the requirement, it's hurt our credit hours, right? But none of the BS degrees, chemistry, biology, neuroscience, none of them have, for us, any kind of language requirement. So, and I'll mention this later on, but I've had to figure out alternative paths to creating an incentive for students to study a language when no requirement exists, right? Because it's a whole, we could talk about that over beer later on, but faculty say, well, we need to demand a language requirement. Well, it's not budget neutral, not ever going to happen. Forget about it. We need to find a different way to get the message to students, right? It's a free market economy. We need to figure out how to best market ourselves to incentivize students, right? So now you probably believe I've been brainwashed. I can see it on your faces. Within the, and not to mention, not to scare you, but the scarcity of employment opportunities and the heavy dependence on contingent faculty and adjuncts to teach our classes. Like these are the challenges that we face. And within this neoliberal context, this market-driven mentality, language programs are perhaps among the most vulnerable programs. But why is that? It's curious, right? Because we know the value of languages. We know also the practicality of studying languages. I saw in the Foreign Language Edge, like there's a component there talking about the language in STEM fields and business and diplomacy. Like we know this, and yet upper administration will believe that language programs are luxuries, that students need to study STEM because that is a more practical, there's more utility in that kind of a major than there is in studying a language. And we've all seen these stupid stories in the USA Today or wherever of a French major who is now a barista, and I have a Spanish major who is now the director of multicultural affairs at not Porsche, Mercedes in Atlanta. So, there's stories of alumni who are doing amazing things in the corporate world. So we can think of these neoliberal market-driven ideas and show hey, our students aren't just working in nonprofits and museums or in Starbucks. They're doing all kinds of other stuff. Often language programs, I've seen this as I've done these consultancies, language programs are marginalized from internationalization efforts on campus. The focus is on developing study abroad and English-only programs and things like that. Often the language department, and I've heard this time and time again, I've done program reviews or consultancies, faculty complain that, the associate provost of international initiatives doesn't even come to talk to us. Well, how can we insinuate ourselves in those internationalization efforts? Let's not wait for him to come to us or her. Let's figure out a way to make ourselves relevant to them. Clearly, loss of enrollments translates to budget cuts. And often presidents and provosts either have had a bad experience studying a language, and they'll say, well, I'm no good at languages. Or they'll say, if somebody as smart as me can't learn a language, then what hope is there for, and at Georgia State we have a high percentage of first-generation students. So what hope is there for a student who's never really even experienced college? Isn't there some more important things for them to study, right? And my answer to that is no, right? Clearly not. But they question the value of language study in a world also that they perceive to be dominated by English. And there's all kinds of studies that show the English spoken around the world, unless you're in this kind of diplomatic bubble or this kind of business bubble and you're at this G8 conference, the English is not the lingua franca in the world, right? But the perception is that, with globalization, English is everywhere. Yes and no. There's English out there, but it's a very, very, very poorly spoken English. And as we all know, if you speak German and you're going to work for a German company or do business in Germany, having that linguistic connection, that cultural connection, gives you a leg up, right? So, also there's a misconception. So, I'll talk about our name change, but for our department. But when we think of language programs, and often you'll say, well, it's the Department of, Modern Languages. Well, that branding is telling people, what we do, and the perception of what we do from the outside is, they just do languages. And so often, people, if you see colleagues in other departments, they'll say, I didn't know that you did such amazing research. And you hear these weird comments, but people will think that what we do is just translate one language to another, which also completely misunderstands what translation is. So, as educators, also part of the job we have is not just educating students, but educating people outside the department about what we do, who we are, why what we do is important. Now, there's within the language program, right? Clearly, it's not just language; it's language and culture, right? And culture to cover linguistics, literary studies, cultural studies. But even that term internally has created issues where you see this, what's called, I don't know if you know Hiram Maxim at Emory, but he's termed, I don't think he coined the term, but he's written extensively about the bifurcation of language programs. And he has a great article about the German program at Emory. But, and I have this issue still with some of my own faculty where they say, well, the upper level courses are literature and culture, and the lower classes are language. And the language program had better prepare them for my class when they get to 3,000. Not how that works, right? Because, and it's so, you all may be familiar with Heidi Burns. She has a famous comment where she says, culture from the beginning and language throughout. So we've really tried to focus on proficiency is our goal, right? Cultural competence is our goal, but it doesn't happen overnight. And by the time they get to be a senior, even if they've done study abroad and they've done this and they've done that, their proficiency level is not advanced or superior, like it's intermediate mid or intermediate high. So we need to teach, and I tell my faculty, we need to teach the students we have, not the students we wish we had, right? We need to teach the students where they are at. It's up to us to bring them up, right? So what is the national context? Of course, I'm sure you are all familiar with the Modern Language Association, correct? Let's hope so. Right, this is kind of our point of contact, for higher education. Our first point of contact for kind of language issues is the MLA, right? And the MLA, does a number of things related to languages that I think is important for us. And one really important tool that they offer is the language enrollment survey. Are you familiar with that? At the end of my slide, so I have a list of resources. I'll give my presentation to Natalie, and she can make it available to everybody. But there's a list of resources of all the websites of all the organizations that I'll be talking about. Now, the MLA Language Enrollment Survey I think it was started in the late 50s. So every 3 years, and this is something, if you've ever done a survey, or if any of you do research that involves surveys, the most difficult piece of a survey is getting people to fill out the damn survey. They have, I think, a 96% response rate, but because Dennis and it's a ragtag team of people at the MLA that. And Natalia Lucen is the person who directs the kind of enrollment survey. But they reach out to registrar's office. So they don't contact department chairs. They reach out to registrar's offices and hound them for years. It takes them 2 years to accumulate the data and then a year to kind of process it. If you go to the MLA website, you can track over time. You can dive into language. You can look at Vanderbilt. I looked at your data. I'll just leave it at that. So take a look at your data. But you can look at your data compared to other universities. You can look at your data across time. You can look at languages and compare languages. It's amazing in terms of, but again, here we come data analytics. Being able to do that, being able to compile an Excel sheet that communicates a narrative through numbers. That is speaking the language of upper administration. Now, with the language enrollment survey, you can download, if you say, I'm really good with Excel, you can download all of the data. You can just take it all. It's wide open. Now they're working on this is the next iteration of I think it should be coming out this year. It should be published. This last 3 years should be published on their website before December. I think Dennis wants it up before the end of the year. But in 2009, that's when we started to see a drop in enrollment. So overall, there's been a drop in language enrollments. But then you can kind of dig deep, and you see like there's areas where certain languages that have increased, but there's also certain schools that have increased. And so the question is why? Why have certain schools seen an increase in enrollments and other schools seen a decrease? And there's not, Dennis is not 100% sure, but his best guess is curriculum, outreach, recruitment, like departments that are thinking strategically and showing how they connect with other units on campus are doing better. Now, of course, are you all familiar with the 2007 report? A lot of kind of what we'll be talking about, and a lot of what in the language field, especially within MLA, kind of frames the conversation is this 2007 ad hoc committee report that was titled Foreign Languages and Higher Education, New Structures for a Changed World. So some of the things they recommended in that, and this was post 9/11, kind of suggestions of changes that higher ed needed to implement, foreign language departments needed to implement. And this is before like any kind of economic crisis. So it's really, amazing the foresight it almost predicted, or at least it was preparing for the kind of scenario that we find ourselves in now. Recommendations: eliminate the two-tiered system, right? This bifurcation of curriculum. Have as a goal translingual and transcultural competence. Offer an integrative approach with multiple paths to the major, not just literature, but other like languages for the professions. If students want to study linguistics, like let them do that too, right? But not having this kind of monolithic major that doesn't really address the interests or needs of students, right? Promote alliances between K through 12 educators and college and university faculty to strengthen language learning at all levels and to foster collaboration, right? So here we are 10 years later, and all that was done, and it's perfect, and that's the end of my presentation. No, we're 10 years later, and we're still trying to figure out, like, how are we going to do this? And I've seen this, like, you would think, oh, this is clearly what we need to be doing, but you combine the kind of glacial pace of institutional reform with the reticence of academics to change, and now with reduced resources, there's a tendency for faculty and academics to want to dig in and just close the doors and just isolate ourselves and just say, look, I'm just going to do my thing and forget about it, right? And on top of it, this kind of neoliberal mentality, it creates a strong tone of cynicism among faculty. And so finding a path forward and thinking of like, well, what can we do now? Like, they're cutting our budget, they're doing this and that. Like, how are we going to figure this out? So that's the crux of the question is, how do we figure this out, right? And so I'll have more on that in a little bit. So the ADFL, which is within the MLA is essentially two organizations, the ADE, Association of Departments of English, and Association of Departments of Foreign Languages. So the ADE, with Dennis's guidance, has started this consultancy. So the consultancy is an attempt to create a mechanism through which people, like especially people on the executive committee, will go and visit departments that are struggling, and something that departments request. It's not a review, it's not an evaluation. For example, I'll talk with the chair, I'll have a sense of the landscape of the department, where the challenge is, and I'm just there to kind of like jolt things around and suggest some ideas. And as kind of the gunslinger that comes in from out of town, I really have a lot of fun, because I can say things to faculty like that I wish I could say to my own faculty, but because I'm leaving the next day, like I could say whatever I want and like, hey, I'm out of here. But sometimes like a chair, and I'll let the chair guide me and say, you tell me, what do these faculty need to hear? because they may want to just complain about how rough they have it. Well, okay, you can pick up your ball and go home, but the game is going to continue to be played with or without you, right? So here's what you need to be thinking about, right? So I can say that, and so the consultancy is so I've done 3 consultancies. I've consulted on a consultancy on a 4th one. I'm doing a 5th one in the fall. Then at the MLA, if anybody is at the MLA, I'm organizing with the ADE a 3-hour workshop to train consultants. So the idea is to try and standardize kind of what we should be doing as language departments. What are some possible paths to make ourselves relevant, to foster an atmosphere of change? On the website, they also have the ADFL Bulletin, so that's open access. You can access any of the articles in the ADFL Bulletin. They also have some really interesting checklists, and so any of you who are going on the market this fall, take a look at that. There's great suggestions for Skype interviews, for MLA interviews, alt-ac careers, and there's also stuff for chairs, for foreign language chairs, so advice about how to deal with difficult faculty and things like that. ACTFL is another major organization that I think everybody should be familiar with. They've been great. Early on, ACTFL and the MLA used to be one organization, and then they've split. And ACTFL, I think the perception is that, well, ACTFL does K through 12 mostly, and you do see a number of higher education people there, mainly in the area of second language acquisition, right? It's not a conference that, for me, as a literature or cultural studies person, that I would normally go to. But as I mentioned, I will be back for ACTFL in November, basically because of my affiliation with the Title VI Center. But ACTFL has really given us some nice blueprints to follow for thinking about students and student needs in terms of proficiency, in terms of cultural competence. They have the proficiency guidelines, world readiness standards. They have the can-do statements that they developed in Assessful. What I've started doing, especially in some of my 3,000 level bridge classes, like we have a class that is written communication in Spanish, I start off with, your first assignment is look at the can-do statements. You evaluate your own proficiency level. You tell me where you're at. And often students are much harder on themselves, but they had no idea that this thing even was a thing. And I have found that students really love knowing that, and because also what's brilliant and genius about the can-do statements is they're positive, they're can-do, they're focused on what they are able to do and what they're able to communicate. And oftentimes they're hard on themselves, but they also realize that they can do more than they ever thought they could with language. There's also smart briefs through ACTFL's website where you can sign up and get updates on things going on nationally with kind of bills that are being proposed in Congress, or Title VI issues, Fulbright-Hays issues, things like that. And they have a new initiative called Lead with Languages that has come out of a AAAS report that I'll mention in just a second. But it's designed to draw attention to language study, to inspire young high school and college students to become language teachers, because there is a critical shortage of language teachers in the country. Of course, within, or kind of tangential to ACTFL, you have all of the AATs, ATSP, ATF, ATG, all those, American Association of Teaching whatever language, right? But at the national level, really, ACTFL is the umbrella organization for languages is key. And they're here in Nashville, November 17th to the 19th. The National Foreign Language Center, the National Foreign Language Center is a organization that is based in University of Maryland, and their mission is to promote language competency by developing and disseminating information that informs policymakers. Now, the big thing that they do is they oversee the Start Talk program. and is anybody familiar with StarTalk? It's a language immersion program that is funded through the NSA. And it is an amazing thing. So elementary, middle school, high school students doing like a week, 2-week language immersion program or longer. They also have publications about the need for world languages teachers and a resource guide to developing linguistic and cultural competence in the US. So a lot of what they do is policy, like language education issues with a policy kind of slant to it. The language flagship program, and it's similar to the StarTalk program, but a much kind of wider, more in-depth program. And it's a program that is designed to develop curriculum at the undergraduate level and to develop undergraduate programs. This is funded through the Department of Defense. And it's a component of the NSEP, the National Security Education Program. And one of the last things Obama had done, this was a year before he finished as president, Marty Abbott, who is the executive director of Actual, is on the NSEP, right? So there's these interesting kind of connections among organizations and initiatives. The American Councils is an organization that focuses on mobility and immersion, primarily to Eastern Europe. Like they have a lot of focus on Russia and that area, in the Baltic area. Recently, they have published 2 really important white papers, one on the kind of increase in dual language immersion programs, and another on world language enrollments K through 12. Right, so it's similar to what the ADFL does, but looking at K through 12. What's curious is in K through 12, they found an increase in world language enrollment, while the MLA is seeing a decrease in world language enrollment at the university level. So what really calls your attention is, well, what's going on? Where are those students going? Why are they not studying languages? The language resource centers, so these are funded through Title VI of the Higher Education Act. And they were funded, Title VI was started back in the 50s after Sputnik, when they realized they didn't have anybody in the government who spoke Russian. They said, holy cow, we need to teach people Russian because we don't know what's going on. So, and culture is one of these national foreign language resource centers. There's 16 in the country, and there's one at Duke and one in Atlanta, and that's it for the Southeast. And then JNCL Nichols is a lobbyist organization that's based in DC and does everything related to language advocacy. They also have email alerts, and they have a piece on their website where if there's something coming up, for example, with Title VI, you can just plug in your zip code and it will tell you who your representatives and senators are. And it has a form letter, just click send and it goes out, right? The only thing I would tell you is be sure to do that with a private email address, not with your Vanderbilt email address. I can explain that later if you need that explained. But JNCL is kind of the clearinghouse for language advocacy and policy in DC. Bill Rivers is the executive director, and he'll be at Nashville, at ACTFL here in Nashville. So if you are at ACTFL, like, let me know. I mean, I would be happy to introduce you to Bill, and he's always on, right? So, which is good. That's what you want in a lobbyist. The most recently, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences published 2 things. One is their report that was based on a binational or bipartisan commission that was called by Congress to look at the impact and the needs of language education in the US. And the other was a statistical report. So they offer recommendations, and then any of the recommendations are backed up with data and statistics. And both of these are downloadable on their website. And I would encourage you to go and download it. But don't share it with anybody. Tell other people to download it because they're tracking downloads as a way to show impact, right? And I brought a copy of the printed, so if anybody wants to look at that, I have that as well. And if you're at the MLA in New York City in January, I've organized a panel through the ADFL that's bringing together 5 of the authors of the report, one from National Security, a guy named David Chu, Jesse Lildo-Baird, who will talk, he wrote extensively in the report about indigenous languages, Marty Abbott from ACTFL, Dan Davidson from American Councils, and Paul Leclerc, who's at Columbia University, and he was the chair of the commission. So the Seal of Biliteracy, this is a major initiative that is occurring at the state level throughout the US. And this is an incentive for high school students to, there's a battery of tests, and then they can get a seal on their high school transcript that attests to their biliteracy, not just speaking, but writing as well. And you'll notice that Tennessee is in yellow. Tennessee is in the very, very early stages of trying to set up a seal of biliteracy. So this is one area where I would encourage you to reach out to the your state organizations to see like what needs to be done, what can you do to help promote this and support this. Now in Georgia, I'll just mention that the seal of biliteracy is about 1.5 years old, but the bill was proposed through not the education committee or some higher education committee, but through the Committee on Economic Development and Tourism. This was something that the business community in Georgia, especially Atlanta and Savannah, were interested in for the connection with international business, right? So then think of all these things, like what is the crossroads? As I mentioned, we're 10 years after the MLA report, yet we're still trying to figure out a path to action. And university departments are doing things in isolation from other departments, not really connecting with the community, not thinking about the national context. So what are our options? So let's do a cost-benefit analysis. And I often tell my faculty this, like, look, if the cost of changing your curriculum is so great that you can't do it, like it's a bar that's too high, that's a bridge too far, then that's fine, but there's consequences, right? If you can't give up your focus on literary studies to have a wider approach to cultural studies, then, you know, be happy with no students in a program that will disappear in a year, right? And sometimes I have to be that blunt with faculty. So we have a number of questions, right? What are we willing to do, and what will it cost if we don't do it, right? So are we willing to incorporate career readiness and tie our discipline to real world issues, right? Or would we rather preserve the perceived purity of the humanities? And you still hear this, well, we're a humanities department. This demeans what we do to talk about such mundane things as careers, right? You know, are we willing to embrace curricular change and pedagogical innovation? Or do we want to maintain tradition and teach how we were taught? And I hear, I'm not making this up, like I hear faculty in my own department and other departments say, well, but I learned it this way, so it should be fine for them, right? Or, are we willing to see collaborations outside the department, not just with other academic units, with non-academic units, with K through 12 schools, with businesses, government agencies, etc. Or would we rather isolate ourselves and just, pass the day complaining, right? So within my institutional context, I really have tried to see our department as tentacular, like reaching out to other units and other stakeholders, let's say, right? To connect and collaborate and to insinuate ourselves where we had not had a presence before. If I hear of something, like I'll shoot an email, or a lot of my time is spent with coffee meetings and lunch meetings. Hey, let's go get lunch. There's a new Urban Studies Institute in Atlanta. It's in the Policy Studies College. I'll email the director, let's go get lunch. At the very least, we're going to have lunch, right? So you don't know what could come out of that, but you can get a lot farther with a collaborative attitude than you can with an isolationist attitude. You know, so then what I describe, or what I will describe within the context of WLC, World Languages and Cultures, these are things that we're working on within our context, in our institution, with our network, right? So I've really thought about the network. Like, because in a resource-diminished environment, if you try to, I mean, we've all seen the Mad Max movies. The more you try to strike it out on your own, the harder it is to survive. Like, you need community to survive, right? So, what I, you know, and I joke that I would love to pretend that I had this grand plan and a vision forward, and, you know, I was leading people to the promised land. But when I became chair 4 years ago, all I knew is we're losing majors, we're suffering budget cuts, we're hemorrhaging credit hours, like something needs to give, right? So all I did was suggest some short-term goals. What can we do right now? Some mid-range goals. What could we be working on for next year or the year after? And long-term goals, right? Which would be the kind of horizon we're moving to. So when I became chair, I said, and it's something that had never been done before. Let's have a retreat. And that summer, as I was becoming chair, or before the semester, I started in July, but then July and August, I was working on my retreat, because you know, humanities faculty, right? They're the most cynical bunch on campus, right? We're well-read, we're really smart, we work on deep thinking, right? So I was really careful that I didn't want the retreat to smack of anything that was corporate-y. We're not going to do trust falls. We're not going to have ice-breaking activities, right? I wanted to give faculty a voice and a sense of agency. That was my main goal. So I sent them a poll over the summer, and I said, there's some issues that came up during the chair search, and here's like 6 or 7. Vote on them, and the top 3 will be our breakout sessions at the retreat. So you set the agenda. You tell me what are the most pressing issues we need to focus on together. Number 1, I said, I decide, and that is the mission statement. I was thinking to give you our old mission statement, but I can't find it. I think I vaporized it and blew it up and then burned it and like threw it to the bottom of the ocean. The old mission statement we had was also on a website that had 0 images, all text, not fun. Like, why would anybody go to this website? Like, I would rather like pound my head with a hammer. Like, it was horrible. But our mission statement was all about faculty research. It was all about what we do. And I said, I don't know that students determine what they want to study based on faculty research. I actually don't think students care about faculty research all that much, especially lower division courses, students who are looking at language study. I said, from my point of view, students come to us because they want to study a language and they want to learn about culture. So what we did was we really focused on the mission statement. And we thought about it in these terms, like, who are we? What do we do? How do we see ourselves? And how do we want to be seen? Like, let's answer those questions. And so we said, okay, we want to communicate to the dean and the provost, et cetera, that we focus on, that we are concerned with aligning with the strategic plan, right? But we also focus on interdisciplinarity. We offer classes that are true cultural studies. And that's where I'm really lucky. My faculty do true cultural studies. One time, I was doing a consultancy, and I won't say where, unless you buy me a beer later and I'll tell you. But a faculty member said, well, I do cultural studies because I do film and literature. I said, it's kind of like Blues Brothers, where they say we have both kinds of music. We have country and Western. Remember that? I said, well, that's not exactly like just saying adding film in there doesn't all of a sudden make it cultural studies. I said, what if we approach a topic, say immigration in Spain, or global citizenship, and we look at it through the lens of discourses. You're looking at politics, economics, film and literature, fine, but music, urban spaces, graffiti, and you're looking at it from all these different angles. So now the student is getting a 360 full 3D view of this issue from all, because what we do at the end of the day, whether it's linguistics or literature, like we're analyzing discourse, like that's what we do. So and that's what really will equip students, and it's a lot more fun. And you can still have literature in there, it's fine. Nobody's taking away literature. But and we focus on communication, and we include in our statement career opportunities, right? Because especially for our students, they don't have the luxury of wasting credit hours. We have 60% of our students are on Pell Grant. They're first generation students. They want to know, if I'm going to invest time and money and energy in this major, in these classes, what am I going to get at the other end? And so we try to answer that question for them. Now, what we did after that was we changed the name of the department. I won't go into the process, but it took me a year and a half of planning and conversations. I'll just tell you briefly, when I have an idea of something I want to change in the department that could have implications beyond the department, I would go to my associate dean and I would throw this idea out there. And she told me, with this name changing to World Languages and Cultures, not going to happen. You're going to have too much resistance because anthropology is going to complain, blah, blah, all these other departments are going to complain. And I was like, okay. There was one item among many that I want to talk to her about. And then all that fall, I had conversations, lunches, coffees with other chairs. I wrote down what they said, and I incorporated all of that into our proposal for the name change, and then it sailed through, right? So, but just knowing where are the rocky shoals, what do you want to do, what's it going to take to get there, who do you have to talk to make it happen, right? But and the idea was with World Languages and Cultures, it's in the name, what we do, what students get when they come to us. It's part of rebranding, right? And we also felt students feel connected to the world, right? So having the world in there was important to tell students, this is your gateway to the world, right? And it also put our Asian languages and our Middle Eastern languages on equal footing with the European languages, right? And that was really important. So with all of this, and I'll describe a few more things, what I would encourage us to do is think multi-directionally. So what I just described, we changed the mission statement. This is the overarching vision for the department. This is our framing document. Essentially, this is our constitution. This is how we see ourselves. Then within that, concentrically, we changed the name of the department. We changed the name of the department. So we drilled down. Then we look at curriculum. How are our classes articulated? What are our course names? What's the sequencing? And we also think about curriculum outside the department. There's these gen ed courses that have cross-cultural perspectives. How can we do more of that to get to students early and reach them and pull them into our classes? We've changed programming, so you're drilling down to the fine-tuned aspects. We changed the name of our literature concentration that was just evaporating majors to language, culture, and society, right? So language is there, culture is there, and society, the real-world issues that they will be able to apply their knowledge to after they graduate. We're working on a BIS in Hispanic media, and I have internships lined up with Telemundo, Univision, and CNN en Español. I mean, it's one of the beautiful things about Atlanta is CNN en Español is 2 blocks away from me, right? So I can walk out the door and go down there. We have students who have graduated and now work for CNN en Español, as well as CNN. We have one student who's a Spanish major who now works on Anthony Bourdain's TV show. So I told her, I'm really upset I haven't met Anthony Bourdain yet. So we have, back in the early 2000s, we had the economics department came to us and said, we would like to propose a joint degree that is international economics and modern languages. My faculty freaked out. I was not chair at that time, but they freaked out. They're going to steal our majors. And they're like kind of running around like with their heads cut off, like just beside themselves. Like, and I was like, God, what is wrong with this? Like, this is awesome. This is a great degree. If that degree had existed when I was in college, I would have done it. We're also thinking about pedagogical approaches. So one thing that we're trying to institute this year is looking at, everybody has in their syllabus participation, right? We're changing that to in-class participation. And then we're encouraging cultural engagement. So for example, at a 1,000 level course, they could go to things like the Foreign Language Edge, these talks, events, things on campus that have a global focus, especially initiatives in our own department, and say, look, you do these 5 things, it's credit, no credit, you do it, you get credit for it, it's an easy 10% of your grade. But so it's like in-class participation and outside of class cultural engagement. So they see what they study in class is also out there in Atlanta, on campus, wherever. See? So strategic planning. The other thing that I've really tried to get us to do is embrace backward design. Let's think about what we want students to walk away with and figure out how we structure that and scaffold that through our program. Now, the other graphic that I would encourage us to think about is, so this is kind of vertically. The backward design, I think you can think of that as almost in terms of time, right? It's a temporal displacement. Let's think about the future so we can plan now, right? But then if we think of these concentric circles and reaching out from the department and kind of looking externally and thinking overtly about our network, who are our strategic allies? Who are our stakeholders? What are the opportunities? And those ripple outward. If you think of a closed environment, what happens when the water ripples out? It comes back. So that information we get from our network, we get from our stakeholders and our allies will inform what it is that we should be doing with our programs. Academic units, like for us, religious studies, international business, hospitality, public health, economics, the Global Studies Institute have been clear allies. But then also non-academic units, Office of International Initiatives, housing, advising, career services. But we've also done a lot to foster community partners, K through 12. We're really connected with the Georgia DOE, the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce. They're 4 blocks away from my office. Chamber of Commerce, binational chambers of commerce, so the French American Chamber, German American Chamber, Hispanic Chamber, etc. We've organized networking events for students, speakers, and we've established internships. Now, I know I'm running a little bit short on time, but we haven't always been successful. So at the first retreat, we're trying to think of recruitment activities. What can we do to draw students in? Of course, all of us are from the analog age. So what's a faculty idea for recruitment? Film series. Let's do a film series. And Georgia State is, it's still predominantly a commuter campus. So students will come, they'll take their class, and then they go home. So students won't stay on campus. Like there's not a lot of, and faculty don't either, right? It's like, because the average commute in Atlanta is an hour and a half. So one way. So people want to get the hell out of downtown, right? So we started this film series, and it was a bust. Like, we would get 3 students come. I started thinking about it. I was like, why would students come to sit in a dark room for 2 hours when they can watch any movie ever made at any time, anywhere in the world, on a device they have in their pocket? So clearly, a film series wasn't a direct recruitment strategy, right? It was fun, and there's pizza and stuff like that. And so I was just thinking, I was like, okay, well, and I said, well, what are students' concerns? So what could combine career readiness and all these different things that's in our mission statement? So, and one of the things we've been trying to do that at Georgia State is they're kind of behind the 8 ball on is alumni outreach. So what I've designed is this lunch and learn, and in conjunction with OII, Office of International Initiatives, and we bring recent graduates back to talk about their careers and how language study prepared them for it. And often these students are not using their language in their career. but they will talk about all these other skills that they acquired because they studied a language, right? So Christelle was working for Porsche. Now she is studying management or something like that at the London School of Economics, right? We have people that have come from Delta, Mercedes, Wells Fargo. All of these are graduates from within the last like 7 years, and we will get 50 to 60 students come to this event because they want to hear about what can I do with language after graduation. Now, so it hits on multiple fronts: careers, languages, alumni outreach. And now what I do is I work with development, and so I invite them to the talk, and afterward we take the alumni out to lunch, and I will say, you know what, it's great, it's great that you came back, it's great you're involved, you should be on our advisory board, right? So part of it is a development angle, but it's also like getting them to share information, like what should we be doing in our language program? And I could talk more about that later. I do want to give just a few minutes, if I can go a little bit longer. So culture is a Title VI National Foreign Language Resource Center. Now, of course, among the metrics that we're supposed to follow is sponsored funding, grants, right? And so part of the reason we applied for a Title VI center is not because I was bored and I had so much free time and I wanted more to do, but like this is something we have to be doing because when the provost looks at sponsored funding and she's seeing a big fat like 0, or even worse, like 5,000, like what's worse than 0 is like this tiny amount of money, like is that all you could scrap together? Like if it's a 0, you can say, well, there's just nothing out there, right? So we applied for a LRC and we got it. Like it was one of those days where you're like, yeah, we got it. Oh crap, we got it. Like the mountain of work that was in front of us. But I want to highlight our two cornerstone events. One is the Global Languages Leadership Meeting. And this is a meeting we organized in the spring where we bring together business leaders, government agencies, nonprofit organizations, and people in education, especially the K through 12 district coordinators. And we have this meeting of stakeholders, right? You know, and what I tell them is we're here to talk and hear from each other, but also to create, I said my ultimate goal with this is to create a symbiotic relationship where I hear from business what they would like to see students develop in terms of skills, what they would like us to do in terms of curriculum. But on my end, what I need from them is internships. And then policy, they need to be pushing seal by literacy, and they need to be setting policy that promotes global skills. So like we're all in the same room at the same table hearing from each other. And then the other event, and it's a really nice lunch. It's great. It's tremendous. The other event, which is coming up, and if any of you are in Atlanta on September 29th, let me know. Come on by. We have World Languages Day, and this is where employers come to campus and meet with high school and college students and tell them directly. So I take out myself, the middleman, I take myself out of the equation. I say, you don't believe me? I get it. Nobody believes me. Listen to the employer. The person that's going to hire you, they will tell you directly what it is you need to be studying. And so at this event we've had, well, already for this fall we have confirmed Porsche, the CIA, DEA, FBI, Social Security Administration, various binational chambers of commerce, the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce, the Georgia Department of Economic Development, and I don't know who else, but we've had in the past American Red Cross, the CDC, CNN. So, and I could tell you all about it, but let me show you something. So through this grant, we were able to make these connections and collaborations within the community that otherwise we would have been hard pressed to do. So let me end with some strategies, some suggestions. Learn to speak the foreign language of upper administration. Know what's going on beyond the department and look for ways to play ball. That's on campus, that's in the community, that's on the national level. Avoid isolation, seek out collaborations on campus, and engage the community. Be your own advocate. But when you can, get somebody else to advocate for you. So when Mercedes-Benz gave a pretty substantial donation to World Languages Day last year, all of a sudden I'm getting calls from the development office. I'm getting an email from the provost. That gets on their radar. That speaks their language. When somebody else comes in, it carries a lot more weight that the provost hears from them. Oh, there's some awesome things going on in the language department. She sees me coming, she's like, oh, here he goes again, right? Know the talking points. Be able to answer students' concerns about careers. Students will often say, why do I want to study a language if I'm not going to go live or work abroad? I have a 3-day answer to that question, right? And then embrace backward design and strategic planning. Always be thinking ahead, but always be designing it so you're minimizing effort, right? And the last thing I want to say is, we are in the business of teaching. And it's really important for us, like all throughout this, hopefully you've seen that for me, like what is at the forefront of my thinking and strategy is the students' needs. And not just career readiness, right? That's the most superficial. But I want to give them the skills they need to be able to navigate the complexities of a globalized world. So beyond language learning, what do we endow students with? Primarily an empathy for diversity. And so I think we can all agree that after what we saw last week in Charlottesville, it's clear that this is a critical need in this country, empathy for diversity. So to be conscientious global citizens, that is the primary student need for me, and one that should be our North Star and guide everything we're doing in our department. Thank you.